born in Laguna in the late 20s, grew up right there on the beaches. My dad had a restaurant called the Laguna Diner right on the sand next to a liquor store. And so when I was 3 and 4 or 5 years old, I was just put out on the beach, and a couple of the lifeguards that were in that area at the time, there was no lifeguard service, but they'd hang out there, started looking after me because my dad promised to give them a beer and a hamburger at the end of the day if they kind of watched the young kid. In those days, there was a depression. You have to think about, nobody had jobs to speak of, and guys actually lived on the beach, lived off the ocean by diving and fishing. Lobsters and abalone were plentiful, and they just lived on the beach and then went surfing as their recreation during those days because they didn't really have a real job. All during the 30s, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, they had an old Model A with a rumble seat in the back, and they'd put me in the back of the rumble seat along with a surfboard, and we'd drive up and down the coast to Doheny and San Onofre, and they'd surf, and then they'd take me out tandem surfing on the board with them, and pretty soon I'd be surfing on the board by myself. And I still have that original redwood here in the museum. Weighed 109 pounds, and we'd just leave it on the beach because nobody could steal one. They were too heavy, too big, and there really was nobody that were really interested in surfing. Surfing was a kind of a non-event as far as most of the public was concerned. And there was probably only 100 people that owned surfboards in all of California. There was La Jolla, Laguna Dana Point area. There was Huntington Beach was a little behind the curve because of the way the waves were there. On the big heavy boards, Huntington Beach couldn't surf as well. And Malibu is another spot, Palos Verdes. Those are the places where the waves were breaking and you could ride a bigger board straight in, where Huntington Beach had a harder breaking wave.
What I do, what I do, what I do, da da do.
Captain Cook discovered Hawaii in 1778. He had an artist on board his ship, and that's the first recorded history of surfboards. He drew pictures of Hawaiians paddling out to Captain Cook's boat. So we know they were surfing it that long ago. Well, it wasn't long after that that missionaries from England and America came to Hawaii, and they deemed that surfing was immoral because of the weather, warm water, warm air. They were all naked. They didn't wear any clothes. So they would be surfing nude, and the missionaries looked at that as thinking that's what's caused these natives, or savages as they called some of them, to be outrageous because they were driven from a sexual standpoint, everybody walking around going to the beach naked. So the missionaries stopped surfing. Actually, surfing almost came to it wiped out for a couple hundred years because they shut it down, and all of a sudden you had the Hawaiians dressed in long dresses like you had in America in the 1800s. And it wasn't until Duke Kahanamoku became a well-known swimmer and won the Olympic gold medal, and he was a surfer. By then, the missionaries had lost some of their input. That's why Duke is considered to be the founding of modern-day surfing because of his prestige and the gold medals, and he was surfing, and all of a sudden it became part of Hawaiian culture, and that became part of our culture. We wanted to emulate that part of our culture. So that's how it all kind of evolved, but it was over, several hundred years, basically. I was like 12 years old, so I didn't go in the service, but the rest of us that stayed there couldn't really go to the beach because the Coast Guard, at least at Laguna, had put barbed wire and barricades there, and you couldn't go to the beach. There was Army and Navy patrols on the sand, and there was gas rationing, and you just didn't have enough gas to drive up and down the coast looking for surf. So everything stood still until really 1946. And by then, some of the veterans were starting to come home. They had the GI Bill, they were going to college, there were jobs available because the military was still building a lot of defense projects were still in the works, and people had jobs at Douglas Aircraft and the shipyards in Long Beach. And so all of a sudden, in my mind, everything, the culture changed. Where in the 30s it was very low-keyed and everybody didn't have much money or energy to go do things, didn't have the ability to do them.
Hi, my name is Frank Shirelli. I started surfing board surfing in 1946, but before that I was body surfing and using belly boards and jumping off the pier. When you were raised in Huntington Beach, you went to the beach and you learned to body surf. You learned the board surfing came later, and you had to have a couple bucks to get into board surfing. You couldn't pay for a board. You had to find someone to shape the board for you.
My name is Harlan Labard. I'm from Huntington Beach. My early surfing career started probably in around 1936. At that time, though, we weren't on boards. We were body surfing and riding belly boards. The board surfing for me didn't start until a couple of years later when Art Beard came over, took one of us tandem, and got our interest up in the board surfing. From that point on, if you wanted to go surfing, you had to make your board, and that's what we did.
My name is George Strempel. I live in Laguna Woods, California, and I'm a lifetime surfer. In the late 40s, I began surfing at Seal Beach, California. Jumping off the pier saved us from swimming through the waves there at Huntington Beach. We could walk out on the pier, jump off, body surf in, walk out on the pier, jump off again, and repeat the process. If you had a belly board, you'd throw it in, and your fins, and then jump in and retrieve them and put them on and start surfing.
My name is Joe Riddick. I'm a surfer. Some of the happiest days of my life were involved with surfing and the ocean environment. I had the good fortune most of my life to be close to the ocean. When I was in grade school, I went down to the ocean by a little park by my house, and we body surfed. We also surfed with pillowcases, which we put in the water and filled with air and surfed with those. I lived in Long Beach. Consequently, the surf was diminished as they built the breakwater during the Second World War. As the breakwater moved east, we had to move east to find the surf.
My name is Bob Gruneisen. I was born in Long Beach, California. I started surfing in the 1950s, and I surfed up until about 5 years ago. I started surfing in Southern California, actually in the channel between Long Beach and Seal Beach. That's where I learned to surf. And then as I got a little bit better at it, I started surfing Seal Beach and Huntington Beach.
I am Chuck Blenheim, born in 1936. I started surfing in 1954, but my first initiation was in 1941 at Waikiki Beach during the war. I started surfing in Southern California. I was introduced to surfing by Bruce Braun and Eddie Drone in 1954. And then I bought my surfboard from Hobie in 1954 in December. A Hobie surfboard, balsa wood board.
I started surfing on a 9-foot paddleboard that was built by a classmate of mine at Anaheim High School in 1942. It was a hollow paddleboard, weighed about 45 pounds, didn't have a fin on it, and first day I rode it was at Seal Beach. The first wave I took off on, I caught and stood up on.
These boards are all from the late 1800s to early 1900s. First surfboards were solid wood, usually out of redwood, but in Hawaii they didn't have redwood, so they used other local woods, which were denser and heavier. The reason they had to make boards lighter because they were always heavy, so they tried to carve them out at some point, make them a little lighter. But these are all the solid boards. These are very historic. This board was made by Duke Kahanamoku on the beach at Corona del Mar for a guy named Ron Drummond. He was 6'8", so he wanted a longer board than normal. So we have the history. This was made for a beach boy in Waikiki. All of these are one-piece boards. You can see on this one the dovetail piece of wood that stops the crack.
I started surfing on a Lifeguard hollow paddleboard that was about 100 pounds. It was about 12 feet long, and it had no fin, so you couldn't turn. All you did was take off and go straight ahead.
Well, the next stage in surfboard manufacturing after the solid board was a semi-hollow board. So they hollowed these solid redwood boards out, and unfortunately they didn't have the materials to stop them from leaking. So on these boards you can see where these have been hollowed out, plywood's been put on them, but they didn't have the fiberglass or resin to fill up these holes where the nails and the screws are. So these boards would leak, and we used to surf these, and within 15 minutes they would start to sink. And once they would start going down, you had to get to the beach or they would be on the bottom and you could never get them off. So all the boards then had holes in the bottom of the board where we'd drain the water out. Once they'd leak, we'd put a wine cork in that hole and go surf, then bring it to the beach, pull the plug out, let it drain, then go back in. So you couldn't stay in the water very long. And the other thing, when we hollowed these out, the rails, you couldn't shape the board very well. So it didn't have any aerodynamic shape. So that was a phase more in the 20s and the 30s, but it was always about getting the boards lighter.
The year I started board surfing was 1947. It just so happened at 72nd Place, there was a lifeguard that was an ex-GI, and he and friends board surfed right there at Alamedas Bay entrance at 72nd Place. His name was Bob Gravich. Everyone called him Hammerhead. He and his little dog Corky lived in a truck that was converted to a camper. I came to him one day with this surfboard that I'd obtained at a garage sale. It was a redwood pine. It weighed 120 pounds, was 13 foot in length. He looked at me and said, "Joe," he said, that was about the time Mighty Joe Young, the movie, came out. And he said, "Joe, the only guy that could ride this board would be Mighty Joe." And from then on, I was Mighty Joe to Hammerhead.
The next step in the evolution after the hollow board was they reverted back to the solid board, only this time, instead of it being solid redwood or a heavier wood, they discovered balsa wood, which is only grown in Ecuador. It's much lighter, so they used balsa wood in the center to lighten the board and keep the redwood on the outside to protect the balsa wood. The balsa wood is very porous, and if you get a little ding in it, it will soak water like a sponge does. And so they went back to the solid board because they could shape it better, and it had a better aerodynamic shape, and it didn't leak and have that downside, but it still was heavier than they wanted. So now boards in this area are down in that 70, 85 pound range, but still solid. And then they took these same boards and started shaping them smaller. And this was one that we call a hot curl board that was made for Hawaii. So it's narrower. They took a board like this, shaped it down narrower to go faster in a Hawaiian wave, but you give up the bigger tail, which allows you to turn it more. So there was always a trade-off. If you wanted to go fast and no turns, or if you wanted to get more turning in. But all these big boards, even with a wide tail, were very hard to turn, and usually if you were standing up, you'd drag a foot in the water. You couldn't just step back on the tail block and swing it around like they do today on little light boards, because it's just too heavy. But you'd drag a foot, and that would bring the board around in a slow motion, or if you're still on your hands and knees, you'd put your hand in the water, and that would swing it around.
I started with a board that I made by myself with the help of Rocky Freeman. In order to get the wood for that, we'd have to go up to Southgate at General Veneer in Southgate, and you would sit there and you sort through piles of balsa wood, hoping to find the best wood that you could for your board. And you come back, we glue it up and shape it and hope that it worked well.
Well, the fourth step is a solid balsa board. So these didn't happen until after the Second World War, when fiberglass was invented. So once that was available, you could use all balsa wood, but keep it watertight by doing the whole board in fiberglass and giving it extra strength. So that lowered the weight from roughly 80 pounds down to 40 pounds. It got rid of the redwood. So these boards are all solid balsa covered in fiberglass and are of the 1950 era. So that was a big advancement, and that's when commercial manufacturers came into being. Hobie started in 1950, Velzy had started a little before that, but not in a big way. You'll start to see different names on boards, and that's when the logo became available. Up until then, there was no logo. It was just made by an individual in his dad's garage. This was a big leap forward, and it allowed girls to start surfing too, because now the boards were light enough and we could make an 8-foot balsa board would maybe only weigh 30 pounds.
My board at the time was 9'9", 4¼ inches thick, 22.5 wide. It weighed probably close to 30 pounds. It was glass with 10-ounce glass and single fin. And I learned my surfing at San Onofre with Gretchen Van Dyke. And she told me that this is your first time in the water, you look like a pregnant frog. Put your legs together because you're purling all the time.
Well, here's something very interesting. Dale Velzy shaped surfboards himself for years in this, and when he passed away, he donated everything he had to the foundation, including all his old tools. So these are the original tools used to make wooden surfboards, and this is where he made surfboards for years. Everything in here, the beer bottle, a hat, all the tools are Dale's. We made a video of him working in here, and we show that to school kids when we have field trips, so they can actually see him making a board the old manner. Now the tools in these glass cases are the more electronic modern tools that he used later on in life. So the tools as well have evolved in this overall period.
Rocky Freeman, he made my first board, and that's how I got started. Well, at that time there was Alan Moore, George Stremple, Harlow Labard, and 5 or 6 guys from Long Beach. They started coming down, and the people from Huntington Beach thought it was crowded when they came down because there would be 7 or 8 guys out. And so you can imagine what it's like today, and then we were griping about being crowded when there were 7, 8 people out there.
The beach was our hangout, of course, and it was also our blackboard. We never took a towel to the beach. I mean, a towel at the beach would be absolutely unheard of. You just lay in the sand. Wet trunks, dry trunks, it didn't make any difference. And then you'd push your arm across the sand and smooth it out, and that became your blackboard. So if you're making a list of something, you're talking with 3 or 4 of your buddies, you're all in a little circle, and you'd start talking. So we cleared the sand off. Number 1, no coat or tie. And so everybody agreed on that. And then we thought a while. Number 2, whatever job I have, I'm not gonna wear a coat and tie, but I'm not gonna wear leather shoes either. For sure, we don't wanna work on the other side of the coast highway. It's gotta be on the ocean side. So then we had these 3 parameters. So what does that leave? Well, if you're gonna be on this side, no shoes, no coat and tie, you could be a fisherman, you could be a surfboard maker, you could be a bartender, and you could be a lifeguard. We could only come up with 4 jobs that you could do under those guidelines. And so we all agreed, okay, that's what we're gonna do.
I never did want to wear hard toe shoes, or I never did want to wear a tie. And I didn't even want to work, but fortunately things change and you have to.
Those 3 rules that Dick Metz laid out, never wear shoes and tie and such, it didn't work out for me. I ended up being a school teacher, so I failed all 3 of those.
The master plan, my life plan, wasn't like any rules at all. It was survival, getting through school, getting a job, scraping enough time together to go surfing occasionally. But I didn't have any highfalutin plans about what I was going to do or not do, really.
I would never, ever take a job anywhere away from the beach.
I would say Dick Metz had a great encyclopedia for the world of surfing that he learned from other people. But as you know, you interviewed Mr. Metz, he's a unique, distinctive person. Very interesting.
Of the guys that I grew up with, and they called them the Dana Point Mafia later on, called all of us that. You know, Hobie and the Surfboards, Bruce Brown in the films, John Severson the magazine, Walter Hoffman fabrics for shirts. I had 22 retail stores, and we stuck to those rules that we established in a real casual way on the beach, and that stayed with us for life.
The Beach Road Mafia, they were all millionaires, and they're still going strong, and more power to them.
These characters that were in the surf industry, and they had a little group that they named the Dana Point Mafia.
They just really had a profound impact on surfing.
It was a fun mafia. It was fun. It was fun. It just is. Many laps.
I had been to Hawaii. I lived on the North Shore. I did that even before I opened the store. So I'd surfed Hawaii. We knew that there was big waves over there and more consistent waves and warmer water. So on these winter days, we'd sit around with all of us and decide, well, there's got to be surf in other places. It can't just be Hawaii and Southern California. And we knew Mexico. We'd been to Mexico, so we knew down the coast there. But that was as far as anybody had gone. Bruce Brown had made several movies. Bud Brown had also made surfing movies. So, but they were all about Hawaii and Southern California and a little bit of Mexico. So when the store was finally sold, I told all the guys, I said, okay, I'm going to take a trip and find out where this other surf is. So I started hitchhiking right from Huntington Beach. I'd even sold my car, and I had a little television set called a Hoffman Easy Vision. I sold for $50 and started hitchhiking the Coast Highway, went down the coast of Mexico and Costa Rica, Nicaragua to Panama, and then I got on a French Army troop ship bound for French Indochina. And I was on that for, I think it was 17 days from Panama to Tahiti. And I got off in Tahiti, and that's where I started really getting into my world tour. So I spent 3 years hitchhiking around the world, from Tahiti through the South Seas, Samoa, the New Hebrides, New Zealand, Australia. Got off in Australia, surfed there for about 4 or 5 months, met some other surfers there, and then I hitchhiked up the Malay Peninsula, across Thailand, Burma, India. Got another ship from India to East Africa, to Mombasa, and then hitchhiked down one side of Africa and up the other side. And you know, you never know where you're going. I mean, I could tell stories about Africa for days, but I got a ride with one fella in Arusha, which was in Tanganyika. Now keep in mind, Africa is 4 times bigger than the United States. So I got a ride in Arusha all the way to Cape Town. I had no reason to go to Cape Town, but he was going there, so I said, well, I might as well go. And when I got to Cape Town, I soon learned it was on the same parallel as Laguna and Huntington Beach, so it had the same weather conditions, only in opposite hemispheres. So in our summer, it's their winter. And there was, just by chance, where he let me out on the little street in downtown Cape Town. The beach there was called Glenn's Beach. I walked down to the ocean. By then I had a full beard, I had hair down to my shoulders, I had old tire sandals on, and I was brown, and you know, I didn't look like an American certainly, and had a rucksack with all my worldly goods. And there was one guy in the water trying to surf on this funny board that he had tried to make, and he lost it, and I went down and picked it up so it didn't bang against the rocks. And when he swam in, I told him, I said, man, this is the ugliest surfboard I've ever seen. And he got real defensive. He said, well, what the hell do you know about surfboards? And I said, looking at this, obviously more than you do. And so he said, well, where are you from? And I told him I lived in Hawaii for a couple of years in California. And he said, oh, you've got to come home with me. So I went home with him and stayed at his house for the next 6 months and surfed all over South Africa. I was the first American to surf at Cape St. Francis, J Bay it's called now. And I went to Durban and all up and down the coast and surfed there and helped them make surfboards, and made this one friend of mine, John Whitmore, when I got home, I didn't get home for another year and a half, but when I did, he became the Hobie agent for all of Africa. And you know, you read about in these magazines adventures, and I was truly having the adventure of my life. Here I'd been by myself a year and a half, hitchhiked halfway around the world, living with a family in Cape Town, South Africa that had a different culture, different attitude, fall in love with a cute little gal that was a model in Cape Town. And I had a hard time leaving. But once I did, I went up through Belgian Congo, the Rhodesias, Tanganyika, Uganda. I saw all the animals, got chased by lions and buffalo and elephants and all kinds of wild experiences. I slept in the jungle by myself. Natives, I lived with pygmies. I met the Maasai in Kenya, the fiercest tribe in all of the world, and learned about their customs. And eventually I worked my way up through the Sudan and Egypt, and eventually got to Cairo and saw the pyramids, of course, and then I hitchhiked on a freighter across the Mediterranean to Istanbul in Turkey, and then into Europe, and I surfed in Biarritz and Saint-Tropez and all along the coast of France and Portugal, and eventually came home. And so as soon as I got home, we had a big party, and Hobie and Bruce Brown and all my pals came, and I showed them the pictures that I had taken over these 3 years. So Bruce decided to follow my trip on an airplane, of course, and he did it in 6 weeks. Followed my trip from Tahiti to Australia to South Africa, and made the famous surf movie called The Endless Summer. When that movie came out, that's what really changed the whole public awareness. Now surfing had really gotten the attention of the public. There was some movies that had been out. It had been written up in magazines. Surfer Magazine started in Dana Point. Surf clubs were established not only in Huntington Beach, but in La Jolla and Malibu, and there became contests between the surf clubs, so that fired up a lot of competition and enthusiasm, and that's when the industry really ignited in the mid-60s. So when Bruce came out with The Endless Summer and Gidget had been shown, and Hollywood became involved to some degree doing Gidget, and the surf world didn't like Gidget at all. Gidget was a true girl. It wasn't that they disliked her, but it didn't show the sport the way we lived it and the way we perceived it. The Endless Summer did that, and when Bruce finally finished all the editing of the movie and wanted to show it, he was in hopes that a Warner Brothers or MGM would pick it up and merchandise it, market it, and they wouldn't do it because they didn't think it was would have enough public attention throughout the country. So Bruce, being the gambler that he is, made a great decision. He went to Wichita, Kansas in the middle of the winter, rented a movie theater on his own, and showed The Endless Summer. And there was a line around the block to get into the movie. And so that's when he knew that it really had caught hold in the heartland of America. And then he went to New York. He did the same thing in New York, and it was sold out. 3 movies a day, around the clock, 7 days a week. It went for like 2 weeks, I think. And then the big movie guys, the Hollywood guys, wished they had taken it because it really did. It was a great story. It was an adventure story, and it showed the guys surfing.
Okay, after Bruce Brown's film, The Endless Summer, the only thing I noticed is that it got more crowded out in the lineup.
Bruce made a wonderful movie, Endless Summer, and I think what it did to me, the impression that I got was there's a world full of surf, and we have to get out there as best we can and ride some of it. Like the great wave, the waves in Africa and Australia and all that. Well, none of us realized that all that was out there.
The films, I think, in my mind, the films before The Endless Summer that changed it even more were the Gidget films. Those 3 films combined radically changed surfing.
Surfing did change as far as attitude. I could tell before there were all the people in the water, people were very cordial to you. Your friends were your friends, and even the people that you weren't friendly with were cordial.
I would say Endless Summer had a big effect on the surfing environment. It covered the global horizons in many areas. It was an educational film.
Huntington Beach is and will remain a center point for surfing for several reasons in my mind. First, it has a lot of white sandy beaches that go on for miles in both directions. It's got the pier right downtown, and the surf is really generated off the sand bottom at the pier. So you can surf at Huntington Beach on both sides of the pier, shoot the pier, and people can watch, spectators can be on the pier and as close to surfers as you can get, where most places, the Trestle, San Onofre, on, Rincon, you know, they're way out in the water and you can't see them. And the same at Newport Beach, the pier at Newport, but the surf isn't as good there. It's better at Huntington Beach. Malibu has a pier, but it's further away. Laguna used to have a pier, but it went down in a big hurricane surf, so that wiped that out. They never rebuilt that. But Huntington Beach is so visible to the public, and it has such a huge population base behind it and around it that it's easy to get to. There's a lot of parking, there's consistent surf. Everybody wants to show off that's a surfer. So, you know, whether they're showing off to a fisherman up on the pier or their best girlfriend, they can get close to the action. And it's great for contests. There isn't another place in Southern California where you can get so close to the action, have a contest, and have thousands of people so close, have the photography so close. So that's why Huntington Beach is always going to be a top surf spot.
Yeah, the pier was there, the same beach was there, although not as many people were interested in watching surfing in those days as it is now. But yeah, there were spectators on the pier watching us. And like I say, it's more open, it's easy to get to, and there's parking.
For me, Huntington has been the best. It's been, number one, it's convenient. Number two, there's generally always some kind of surf down there. Number three, the people that I have met while I was surfing have always been good, congenial, friendly people.
Huntington Beach is rightly named Surf City. It's got surf every day. There's rarely a flat day in Huntington. It gets both swells, the west swell and the south swell. And it's got a hard breaking wave, and when Huntington gets 6 to 10 feet, and you get slammed by one of those waves, you're gonna know it.
It has an ambiance about it and a rep about it going back probably to the 1930s. If you go down there on a weekend, you will probably see 1,000 boards. If you went from north of the pier to south of the pier down to the jetty towards Newport. And it's just a fabulous place to surf.
Huntington Beach is one of the greatest spots to watch surfing because of the pier, because of the surrounding beaches, because of its accessibility. The pier, you can go out and watch guys shoot the pier, and that's one thing that we started back in the 50s because there a lot of times was a current that would break right toward the pier, and the best way to go was right through the pier. Jack Haley, who was the first winner of the Huntington Beach U.S. Surfing Contest, I think won the contest because he shot the pier, and that was something that a lot of people had never seen before.
Huntington Beach was just a place where everybody met. Back in the 30s, at Rainbow Pier, Huntington Beach, everybody came from everywhere to be at Huntington Beach Pier. It was the fun zone. See the oil derrick, see the wooden pier, see the plunge, see the 100-pound boards they're riding. Then the transition, everything was right there. It was just, it was the center spot. Everybody come there because it had a variability of, if you could ride Huntington Beach, you could ride anywhere. Because it's a top to bottom wave.
All I wanted to do was go in the water every day. And I think even today, if you go in the water every day, you're gonna feel better, your mind's gonna be better, everything's gonna be better.
if you want to put one thing on my gravestone, put down that maybe Harlow was at the beginning of surfing, or at least at the beginning of the surfing explosion. Yeah.
Actually, 70 years of surfing and being involved, I always felt lucky that I could do it and was able to do it. And I met a lot of wonderful people. I went to a lot of great places. And I was fortunate enough to wind up on Walk of Fame in Huntington Beach. And there's a lot of people that should be there that aren't. And there's a lot of people that aren't there that should be, and I don't know what category I'm in. But anyway, I really felt honored by that.
It has enabled me to meet many really, really, really good lifelong friends. People that I started surfing with back in the 50s, we still get together every Christmas, and usually at least once during the summer.
The legacy that I'd like to leave in surfing more than anything else would be the friendships that I have made in surfing. Guys that I have met in surfing are the best friends that I've ever had. I've taught surfing to my children. My boys still surf, and hopefully that legacy will be passed on to the next generation.
My wife said, you have a phone call from Huntington Beach Surfing Sport. And the manager said, he's just chuckling and says, we want to honor you, and we feel honored to have you. You have just been selected to be in the Surfing Hall of Fame in Huntington Beach. I said, you got to be serious. And I said a surfing term, I says, I'm really stoked.